Moreinu v'Rabbeinu.
Hi, Amos, and Hanukkah Sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach, everyone. So this is coming out on the
Thursday night.
Fifth day? Well, fourth day.
One, two, three, fourth day of Hanukkah.
Yeah. So
That's right. Which, it's misleading because when you see it on Google Calendar, you see Friday, December 11th is first day of Hanukkah. But you lit the night before.
Yeah.
Because Judaism, the day starts from the night.
Yeah.
That's right.
Also, we want to address if you see any spam comments in any of the videos, just report them. Don't worry. Don't click on any phone numbers or links or emails. Pretty much all the links that we provide are the good links, and that's it. Also,
very important.
Anyone that pretends to be us, because we won't do that in the comments. I think we would keep that to the description. So just bear in mind that
basic cybersecurity.
Yeah. So today's topic is the question with 100 answers. Hanukkah. What's the miracle?
That's right. It's a real basic question. It's a question that many people would ask intuitively. And so it's a two-part question. The first part is the actual question itself, which is a technical question, which really hits on a lot of, possibly the main miracle of Hanukkah. And then the broader question, which has to specifically do with lighting the menorah and the miracle being 8 days and the duration of the miracle. So we'll get into that. And the second one is, what's the big deal? Like the big picture question is, all right, they lit a menorah and it lasted for 8 days. Shkoyach, we learned that as kids. Or maybe you don't learn that as kids.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe you're learning it now. Or maybe you can read it up. The miracle of the menorah. The Chashmonaim conquered the Hellenists, which was, we'll get into that war, if it was an external war or an internal war, and what that means, and what's the significance of the war, and how long did it last. We'll get into that a little bit. But then it culminated with dedicating the temple, or rededicating the temple, I should say, because the temple was under Jewish autonomy, but not under Jewish sovereignty, and that changed.
Yes.
During the Hasmonean dynasty, not just regaining autonomy, but regaining sovereignty in Judea and other parts of Palestine, which is known as Israel.
It's a very important change.
It's a huge change, historically speaking, as far as sovereignty, who you pay taxes to, and why that's such a significant thing.
Yeah. The
specific act that is commemorated by Jews everywhere, and even by a lot of general people, like non-Jews, Gentiles around the world, is lighting the Chanukiah, which is the 8 or 9 branch candelabra, versus the menorah, which was a 7 branch golden candelabra, which was in the temple. And the reason for it being a 9 branch candelabra is one candle is called the shamash, or essentially the candle that serves all the other candles, and its main purpose is to serve the other candles. We won't get into halachic reasons for that, but basically you can't derive benefit from the light of the Hanukkah candles. It's simply to publicize the miracle. Therefore, you need one candle to use for general use, reading a book, lighting other candles, lighting your oil lamp at home, counting money, things like that. And the 8 candles that we light from 1 till 8 on 8 consecutive nights is reminding us of the miracle, which is that 1 jug of oil that the Kohanim, the Chashmonaim family, found in the temple, that was pure, that wasn't defiled by the Greeks or the Hellenists, lasted for 8 days, even though the jug had the quantity of oil to burn for 1 day.
Or at least that's what we learn in school.
Well, yeah, that's accurate. That's pretty accurate, that there was 1 day's worth of oil. Everybody agrees there was 1 day's worth of oil in the jug, in the pach shel shemen, kad shel shemen, which was ceramic, which is also significant as far as the laws of purity and impurity.
Mm-hmm.
And it lasted for 8 days. So you're like, okay, as we say in the Yiddish, shkoyach, great, okay. So so one thing lasted for 8 days. Oh, all right, that's pretty cool. But like, aside from it being cool and very interesting, like why do we do that? What's the miracle? And specifically, you can ask the question, well, if they found a jug that is for 1 day, and then it lasted for 8 days, then here almost how many days is the actual miracle? 7. Right? Meaning, because a miracle is something above and beyond the scope of nature.
Yes, correct.
By definition. And if you're going to publicize the miracle, you wouldn't publicize the first day. If it lasted for 1 day, you wouldn't say it's a miracle. You'd say, wow, they found an oil, that's really great. Shkoyach. And they lit it for 1 day. But that one thing lasted for 8 days. Therefore, it's supposed to last 1 day, but the miracle is it lasted for 7 days beyond its capacity.
Yeah.
So the miracle should be celebrated as 7 days. But it's not. It's celebrated as 8 days, and that's the famous question that Rabbi Yosef Karo, the great 16th century Kabbalist who wrote the commentary on the Arba Turim, which is the foundation for the book of the Codex of Jewish Law today, called the Shulchan Aruch, which he wrote, but he commented on the Arba Turim, which was written several, really 2 generations, more, about several hundred years before he lived, and he lived in Tzfat. So he wrote a commentary called the Beit Yosef, because his name was Yosef.
Right.
And it's a very, very extensive commentary on the halachic work called the 4 Pillars, or Arba Turim, which is the format for the Shulchan Aruch, for the Code of Jewish Law, which then Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote based on the commentaries he had on the Arba Haturim. But this question is brought on his commentary to the Arba Haturim, not in the Code of Jewish Law, where he goes into much more depth and the sources, and instead of just saying what the bottom line, what the halacha is, as we say, what the Jewish law says. It says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what he goes through in his book. But in his commentary, he goes much, much deeper. The reasons behind it, the sources, and whatnot. And this is one of the questions he has. To this question, there's about 100 answers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, let's start from the beginning. So, the question is, first of all, why is this dedication a big deal? What do you say?
The rededication of
the rededication of the temple, and specifically lighting the menorah. Like, why is that? Before we get into the actual technical question of why was the miracle 8 days, not 7 days, which we will get into, but why is this act so significant?
Well, it was a return to norm as such of the times of old, and for the Hashmonaim. In even though they probably weren't alive during the First Temple era.
No, they were not alive during
the
No, but even the Second Temple. Which empire did the Second Temple start in?
The Babylonian.
No.
Who?
The Persian.
Persians. Close enough.
The Babylonians destroyed the First Temple.
Yeah.
And then for 70 years we were in exile. Then the story of Purim happened, which we won't get into.
Yeah.
And then the Jews were able to go back and return to Israel from Babylon and from the rest of Persia. Through the decree of Cyrus. The Purim story happened around then.
My history is clearly not as strong.
That's okay. So Ezra, this is a learning session almost.
Yeah,
so that
it's okay.
Ezra and Nehemiah.
Everyone else can learn too.
Everyone else can learn.
Not just me.
That's correct. Ezra and Nehemiah were the first to really co-build. Really, Ezra more than Nehemiah, but Nehemiah helped him. And this is at the end of the canonized Tanakh and the Ketuvim and the scriptures. There's a book called Ezra, the book called Nehemiah. They're essentially the same book, an extension of the same book. And that's when they rebuilt. They built the second temple, which was a much more modest version of Solomon's temple, which was the first temple.
Because there's a Is it in the Talmud where it says about the people that remember the first temple, the elders that remembered the first temple cried?
No, it's in the Tanakh itself.
In the Tanakh itself.
Yeah.
The elders cried and the youngsters rejoiced.
They also cried.
Yes.
But they cried out of joy.
Joy.
That's right. And the elders cried because they remembered Solomon's temple and the glory of it and how magnificent it was, and saw this little kvetch, small, meager, shadow of itself version of the set of the the second temple built in the time of Ezra was a shadow of the first temple, meaning it was not even close. So they cried because they're like, yeah, we built the second temple, but it's like owning a mansion, having it destroyed, and then building like a little shed and saying, this is my house, and
still having the same area.
And the young people are like, yes, we have a house. It's like your first apartment where you're like, wow, this is amazing. I have a hole in the wall and there's mold and things are falling apart. It's like, you have IKEA furniture because it's 50 square meters, and you're like so excited. Versus someone who goes from a mansion to that and like is lamenting, is like, oh my God, I used to have a swimming pool and now I don't even have a garage. So it's it's basically the equivalent of that now, and it functioned as a temple under the reason I went into detail because we were not under our own sovereignty. So let's define sovereignty.
You wrote an article about that.
I did last year
and I really liked it.
So let's define sovereignty. So what is the definition of sovereignty?
Can I give you your definition?
Yes.
It's who you pay taxes to.
That's right. And it's not my definition, by the way. That's Shmuel Bahat.
But I really like it.
Yeah. That's what I learned
sticks to my mind.
Yes. That is the definition of sovereignty. Or that's the... not the definition of it, but that's the gauge. Right?
Yeah.
That's how do you gauge. Sovereignty is, do you have rule over yourself? Do you have autonomous rule? Political rule, like governance. You have governance over yourself. Or are you under someone else's governance? For example, the myth is that Israel is under the governance of the USA. That is not true, because you don't pay taxes to the USA. Meaning you can pay taxes to the IRS if you're an American citizen. But you pay taxes in Israel to the state of Israel. And a lot of it. I know, because I did that for years. In New Zealand, you don't pay taxes to the Queen. You pay taxes to the government of New Zealand, so you have sovereignty. Mm-hmm. If you were a British colony, you would pay taxes to Britain.
Back in the day, New Zealand would
have been under British sovereignty and would have been a colony, but then it gained independence. You're not dependent anymore on the colony, and so many colonies became independent. Maybe the culture is similar, maybe there's still the Union Jack on the flag and all that, but that's more of a historical reference, and it's all there is. Republicans here versus we'll get into that. Versus, but effectively we have their sovereignty in New Zealand, in Canada, and other places, for sure in the United States, and not under British rule. In Israel today, you have sovereignty, which is a big deal. Which is really huge. Started the War of Independence. 72 years. 2021 is going to be 73 years, which is almost the duration of the entire Hasmonean dynasty, which spanned anywhere between 80 to 120 years, depending on how you count it. And they had rule where you paid taxes to the Hasmoneans, Chashmonaim, meaning to the Levites to Jews who ruled other Jews, and you weren't under the Greek Empire anymore, or the Hellenistic Empire, which is effectively the Greek Empire, the Seleucids, who were the Greek part of the Greek Empire, who controlled Syria and Palestine of the time. It's a huge deal. How big of a deal was it? If you look at the empires, you have the Israeli Empire from the time of King Saul, really Joshua, King Saul, which is 400 years apart, but still, essentially from Joshua, King Saul, all the way until the Babylonian Empire finally destroyed the first temple and exiled the remnant of the Jewish people, mainly Judea and the Levites, to Babylon for 70 years. Then the Persians took over the Babylons. We were able to return to Israel, but still pay taxes to the Persians. That's very apparent in the story of the Megillah that ends with us paying taxes to Achashverosh, which is a huge statement. We'll get into that in a few months when we get talking about Purim. And then we had the Second Temple. We were able to be autonomous there, but our taxes went to the Persians. Then when Alexander the Great and the Syrians and the Seleucids took over from the Persians, they attacked the Persians and they battled them even after they were an empire. We paid taxes to the Greeks, and then the Hashmonaim, what they did is they had a war against the Hellenists, specifically against Antiochus IV, and through guerrilla warfare, they were able to, about 4 years, they were able to recapture many parts of Israel, establish a monarchy in Judea and parts of Israel, not as expansive as Israel is today, but still the middle of the country, all the way to the coast. And specifically the temple then was not under Hellenistic rule and not pagan anymore, but it was Jewish, again, and pure. And one of the main things you have to do at the temple every single day, if you're the high priest, is light the menorah. So it's very symbolic of the temple is ours. We have sovereignty.
Yeah.
What is the symbol of the state of Israel today?
The menorah.
The menorah.
Yeah.
That is, there is no coincidence. That is not a coincidence. There was actually a contest. I mentioned that a few years ago, 2 years ago, in fact. There was a contest about what's the state of Israel the symbol going to be after 1948, and, and that was the drawing that won with the olive branches, which symbolizes peace, and also the olives, right? And Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, so we're our own state, and it's symbolized by the menorah, which is the same symbol as Hanukkah.
Yes.
And the symbol of the temple and Jerusalem. It's all very interesting. Yeah. And that's why the lighting the menorah is very significant. Plus, there's a light we have in every shul called a ner tamid, the forever everlasting light, and that everlasting light needs to be lit. Today, it's of course electric, not a flame, for safety reasons, and also for because you can't have a flame there, not just for safety reasons, but also in general, it wouldn't last. The miracle was essentially in the temple. There were many miracles. One of the miracles was the westernmost candle, because it was to the south, perpendicular. Therefore, it was lit from west to east, or east to west was the right. That's right, close to the Holy of Holies, which is the west. A part of that room called the Holy of Holies, and that western candle would remain lit for 24 hours. Yeah, while the others burned out. And it was an oil lantern, just like Aladdin. Imagine basically an Aladdin candle. There were 7 of those. Yeah. 1 in the middle, 3 on each side. There was no such thing as a shamash, or probably the Western candle was a shamash, but it didn't move. And we learned about that in the Talmud class. So that's what it was. Now, as a, imagine the lighting the menorah is very akin to a ribbon cutting ceremony. Except it's not just a ribbon cutting, of course, for those who don't know, is, they usually give like the mayor or CEO or something these big gigantic unusable scissors that are only meant for symbolic events, and you put a ribbon which is not really there, it's just there for show, and they cut the ribbon with a huge photo. They do cut it, or maybe they cut it with several people, basically inaugurating the space for any new space or dedicated building or whatever. Similarly, you have pictures with mayors and whatever with shovels, even though they'll never use a shovel in their life, as a cornerstone. They're digging a new shul or a new building or a new whatever it is, community center, something they funded, basically to say we're so great, we're getting the honor, blah blah blah. In this case, it wasn't just for the honor. It was an actual act that you do. So it would be much more akin of putting up a mezuzah in your house. You need to put up a mezuzah in your house. And when you do a Hanukkah Tabayit, which means a dedication or an inauguration of your home, which is the same word as Hanukkah, right? Which means a dedication or an inauguration. Similarly, there was Hanukkah Mishkan, when the tabernacle was first built in the desert in the second year, a year and 1 month after the Exodus, or actually a year and 2 weeks before, right? The first of Nisan, the second year, which basically a year after the Exodus, they brought a series of sacrifices for 8 days, and on the 8th day, God brought down fire from the heavens and ate, so to speak, their korban, even though God's not physical, but it's a personification. But he basically consumed their korban with fire from the heavens, which is obviously a miracle, symbolizing that he accepts their sacrifices, and that the temple is now officially ready for normal use. Ready for regular use, and that was his dedication.
Yeah.
Big ceremony mentioned in the Tanakh, mentioned in Parashat Shmini, in the third parasha of the book of Leviticus, of Vayikra, for a reason. And all of them use the same word, Hanukkah, inauguration or dedication. And so in order to dedicate the temple, this time there was no fire from the heavens. People had to do it because there was no prophecy. And they did that by lighting the menorah. Now, they had a light for one day, so they could have just lit for one day. And said, okay, we have to get new oil. Get new oil, but at least we lit for one day. Or they could have waited to get oil and then lit after they got the oil. They didn't do those two options. Or, because the Greeks didn't destroy the oil. All they did was opened the seal. They broke the seal. By breaking the seal, since they're not Jewish, and there's laws of purity and impurity, and they were also involved in warfare and things like that. Therefore, it came into close contact with corpses. They were considered impure. It's a spiritual halachic status.
So all the kadim that the seal was broken on are considered pasul because...
Correct, because they're in ceramic. Because they're in ceramic and they cannot be purified.
Yeah.
Because it's just the law, which we won't get into.
Yeah.
That's the law. So it's a spiritual status. It has nothing to do with cleanliness or hygiene or anything like that. Spiritual thing of purity and impurity. And really, the myth is that you're not allowed to light impure oil. The truth is, halachically, you are allowed to light impure oil.
Yeah.
And the menorah is just of less value. You could also don't have to light with olive oil. You could light with any oil. Though, specifically in the temple, the commandment is with olive oil. That's in Parashat Behalotcha, in the book of Numbers, and Bamidbar. It's right before your brother's Parsha. So, there's two before your brother's Parsha, I should say. Yeah.
I'll bet you'll do that.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. It's the winter time. No cricket. So that's why they lit the menorah. So now we'll have to get into why it was we celebrate the miracle 8 days and not 7.
So we'll leave you with that for now, and we'll go on a break, and we'll be back soon.
We'll be right back.
And we're back. So where were we, Rabbi Tal?
We were at the actual question now. So now we've set the stage for for answering the question, why is the miracle 8 days and not 7 days? If there was 1 day's worth of oil in the jug they found. And we understand the context now. We understand the framework. We understand why this is an important act. Just jump into the answer wouldn't do justice to the actual issue.
Yes. Yeah.
So now let's get into what actually happened. So why it happened, and why did they have to wait for 8 days? Like, surely they can just produce olive oil or buy some.
Yeah.
Right? So what did they do? They went up to the Galilee, got the finest of the olive oil, which is the first oil produced from each olive.
From each olive, yeah.
And it takes about a day or so to gather that. And then bring it back to the temple. And then have the normal supply of olive oil from the Galilee in general runs. Because that's usually where they got olive oil from. You know, olive oil is produced predominantly in which country today? In?
Not Israel.
Spain.
Yeah.
Spain is the number one producer of olive oil today. Of course, there's olive oil made around the world. Mediterranean countries produce very good olive oil. Italy, of course, produces a lot of olive oil. That's why a lot of their recipes are with olive oil. Israel, of course, olives are one of the 7 species.
I believe Greece also has.
Greece, all the Mediterranean countries. Yeah. Good climate for olive oil. There's a lot of olive trees in Jerusalem and all of Israel, specifically in the north. That's why the Golani symbol is an olive tree in the army, right? For example. All these connections. So in the Galilee is known as the best olive oil in Israel. When they collected it, so they didn't have Ubers back then, nor did they have cars or planes or road number 6.
Today.
or road number 6. Today you go there.
Hatisha and
Hatisha, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
half
right.
an hour and back.
Yeah. So you go for like 2-3 hours north to the Galilee. You stop for a coffee on the way. You get it. You come back. You can be there and back that day. Maybe you sleep overnight and you come back the next day. At that time, from Jerusalem to the Galilee was 3 days travel each way.
Yes.
And that was still considered fast. That was like on a horse.
Yeah, that's really
horse and buggy. That was fast. Yeah. And so the 1 day to collect the oil, so it's really 7 days. Maybe 2 days to collect the oil. So basically, it had to...
Shabbat would also have to be in the middle.
Shabbat would be in the middle. So therefore, you have effectively, when you light the first one, you have to make it last for an additional 7 days afterwards until you can light it on the 8th day, really the 9th day.
Yeah.
After they come back. And that's the reason they had to wait 8 days. They wanted to rededicate it right away for reasons we'll get into at the end of the podcast. But also, if you're going to rededicate something, you don't want to wait. You want to rededicate it right now. Yeah. You don't want to wait. It was much more of a spiritual declaration than it was a halachic.
Yeah, it was
reasoning for it.
So-called political statement.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
It was a statement.
Yeah.
Meaning, there's also the Jewish law side of it that you have to light the menorah in order for the temple to be a functioning temple.
Yeah, but it was more of a here it is and we did it sort of symbol.
Absolutely.
So let's get into what we just talked about just before we came back, which is the prayers that we have in the Amidah when we say Al Anisim during Hanukkah. We talk about the wicked people and the impure people and the Zedim, which we were lost on.
The people who do wrongdoings deliberately, potentially.
Deliberate wrongdoers. There's no word for that in English.
I don't know if there is.
English is a weird language.
English is a very strange language.
But within the commentary of the Siddur, the article Siddur, it's found under. I was looking at Shacharit, and so the commentary for that states that those people are not the Syrian Greeks, rather they were the Jewish collaborators. So let's get into that a bit.
Right.
And why...
We want to get into that, and then we also want to answer the question about the 7 days.
Yes.
So, the war was twofold, or on two fronts. There was the actual physical war, and then there was a spiritual / cultural war. There was an actual war because they were under Greek sovereignty. Antiochus IV historically went down to Egypt. He fought against the Parthians, which are Persians, because they were always fighting even though it was under the Greek Empire.
Yeah.
The rumor got out that he was killed. It was a false rumor. And the Jews in Israel celebrated. And when he came back from Egypt and heard that the Jews celebrated that he was dead, well, he didn't take to that so nicely, and he killed a whole bunch of Jews. Now, historically speaking,
fair enough, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Partially.
Historically speaking, that's what ruthless dictators did. So, as sad as it is, of course, I say that with a little bit coldly in history. Obviously, it's horrible. People slaughtering other people, but in the historical context, that's what you do. If you're a dictator. However, he did something that was unprecedented in his time, and even until that time point, setting a precedent for years and years and years and generations to come, which is putting religious sanctions on the Jews. Not forcing them to adopt Greek religion, which he also basically tried to do, but forcing the Jews not to
practice
keep their own religion.
Yeah.
It was never done before. Meaning, usually you have, say, the Moabites go to Israel and say, adopt our gods, or die. That's all legitimate in warfare. And Israel's like,
no,
I'll tell you where to go. And they're like, okay. And then they fight to the bloody death, and whoever wins.
Yeah.
That's warfare between nations, between pagan nations, and throughout all of history.
Mm-hmm.
Never until Antiochus IV, who was a Seleucid, and the kingdom after Alexander the Great was split into different factions, if you will, or different families. Right, the Seleucids controlled what they called Syria. They ruled from Syria, Israel, and the whole region in that part of the Middle East.
Syria, Palestina.
Yeah,
more or less.
Yeah, more or less. Syrian Greeks, as they were known.
Yeah,
that's why they were known as the Syrian Greeks, right? Because there are other Greeks in Athens, etc., and other places. And he said, no, you can't. The Jews can't keep Shabbat. You can't do circumcision. You can't eat kosher food. Things like that. You can't learn Torah.
Yeah.
And it became a cultural war. And not only that, but he got Jews to be Hellenists. Being a Hellenist was incredibly attractive for a lot of different reasons. Glorified the body, glorified aesthetics in the name of aesthetics, without any spiritual Greek mythology.
Yeah.
A lot of these things, strength, might, and things that Judaism. I won't get into the whole culture of it, but as a culture, it spat in the face of what Judaism said. It was the antithesis of Jewish values.
It's not the forefront.
Correct.
Of Jewish
Jewish values today adopt a lot of Greek in them, but elevate them to where they serve spiritual needs versus, for example, aesthetics. It's important to have a mitzvah, to do a mitzvah in an aesthetic way, but it's for the purpose of doing the mitzvah, not to gloat how great your body is. It's important to keep in shape in order to serve Hashem, not in order to be naked and do the Olympics and nude to show off how amazing your body is.
Yeah.
Those are the key differences. Hellenistic culture, even today, incredibly attractive. Basically, the Western culture is not based on Roman culture; it's based on Greek culture. And the Romans, they had their own gods. Essentially, made the Greek culture much more powerful. But the Greek culture is the predominant culture we fight today. That's why Hanukkah is an incredibly, wildly important holiday, even though there's only one mitzvah, which is to light the candles.
Light the candles. Or light a candle.
Light a candle.
At the very minimum.
Every night.
As we learnt about in the
Greek period.
Talmud class.
So, for example, what things did they do? They were in charge of the Septuagints. They they facilitated the translation of the Torah into Greek over 3 days.
Yes.
With 70 elders who, without a WhatsApp group, they managed or FaceTime. They managed to all translate it into Greek identically.
Yes.
70 people. 70 Jews agreeing on one thing. Extremely rare.
Never happens.
Never happens.
And
it's called the Septuagint, or the Septuagint translation.
They'll made a mistake in one particular place or something on purpose.
They changed, for example, Bereshit bara Elohim, which is your parasha, to Elohim bara Bereshit. Yeah. They didn't make a mistake. They translated it so that God created the beginning, not the beginning created God. Yeah. So they translated it in a way that that's all they all have the same nuances. Yeah. They were all coordinated. Maybe they all had the same talking points. And apparently they're all coordinated. It's called the Septuagint translation, and the whole idea was to show the consistency of the Jewish people, but the fact that it was translated into Greek and halacha is viewed as 3 dark days in history. It happened on the 8th, 9th, and 10th days of Tevet. One of the reasons we fast on the 10th of Tevet, aside from the fact that that was time that year's empires earlier, Nebuchadnezzar put the city of Jerusalem under siege, which is also the original reason of the fast of the 10th of Tevet, which comes about a week after Hanukkah ends.
The middle of camp.
In the middle of winter in Israel. Here it's summer. All that being said, so that's one example. And the battle, the actual battle, was as much between Jews and Jews, or Jews and Hellenists, the Jews that kept the original tradition of the Torah, and Hellenists, as it was between Jews and Greeks. Yeah. And Judah the Maccabee ended up winning the war, but it wasn't one war. It was a war over many, many years. A lot of guerrilla warfare. They hid in the hills of Judea, in the town of Modi'in as well. And a lot of the towns around Modi'in today are named after the story of Hanukkah. So there's the Yeshuv of Maccabim, there's the Yeshuv of Chashmonaim, there's Modi'in, there's Modi'in Elite, there's a lot of in Beitar. It's Kiryat Sefer. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of places. Moshav Modi'in, which is a Karlibach Moshav, that unfortunately burned down last year, which is really sad.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
very,
I
very
heard
sad.
about that.
Yeah, great place though, and please God, it'll
And
be
it'll
rebuilt.
be
Around
rebuilt
Vietnam.
and
It's a
really
great
good.
place. Lots of good concerts there. Lots of good people live there. I know some of them. And the history is preserved, and the graves of the Chashmonaim are there.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you can see it. You can see them today.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is incredibly important because what they were doing with lighting the menorah was fighting the culture war. So how was it though 8 days, not 7? So what did they do? For example, they needed it to last for 8 days. So one of the answers is, how was it 8 days? Because they took that one jug of oil. They knew it had to last for 8 days. So it lasted an eighth. They put an eighth. They filled each candle up to an eighth of it.
Mm.
Thinking, look, it's going to light for an eighth or 12.5% of the day.
Yeah.
Right? Fine. It'll be what it'll be.
Yeah.
But the miracle was that even though there was only eighth of the oil, that the oil lasted for a full day.
Mm.
Each one of those 8 days, until they can bring back the proper batches of oil from the Galilee.
Yeah. So that's one of the answers
That's
for
one of the answers.
8 and not 7.
Correct. Another answer was that they lit it. They put the oil fully, and two answers. Either it didn't diminish, like it stayed in the same, like it didn't burn down. Oil, the way it works, there's the oil, there's the wick, and there's the flame.
Yeah.
And usually what happens is that the wick sucks the oil in order to produce the flame, and then the oil goes down and down and down and down and down and down until there's no more oil left. At that point, the flame naturally extinguishes because it has nothing to fuel it.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like a car filling up petrol for a car, because ignite the spark. You don't have petrol, there's no sparks to ignite, and therefore the motor stops working.
Yeah.
After the fumes and all that stuff.
It's weird because I understand the menorah concept better than I do the cars.
Yeah, well, that's because they're electric cars too.
But I think it's just I know more about Hanukkah than I do about cars in general.
That's
so,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Don't be a mechanic then.
Not planning on it.
Oh, thank God. The third, me neither. The third answer, which is part of it, is that it diminished, but it only diminished an eighth of the time. So they put in the whole jug,
Yeah.
thinking it would last for one day, and then whenever it'll come back. At least we dedicated it. And the miracle was it lasted for it only went down an eighth each day, and they reignited the wicks every single day. Maybe
Which is the exact inverse of what you said earlier of putting an eighth in. And
so we don't know exactly how they did it.
yeah.
We don't know. It's not that relevant exactly how they did it. The point is that by and there's other answers I'll get into in a minute, but the point is that any one of those three answers basically says, look, that there was the miracle itself was that Hashem created an a-natural phenomenon or above nature phenomenon for the oil to last for 8 days when it was really supposed to only last for 1.
Yeah.
In a way that even the first day itself was done in an a-natural or above nature way. Either the oil didn't diminish, only diminished an eighth, or an eighth lasted a whole day. So any one of those three configurations are not natural. Even the first day, therefore, the miracle lasted for 8 days.
Yeah.
And not just for 7.
Can you imagine being the guy that was sent out to the Galil to get the oil, and you've schlepped as fast as you can to the Galil, schlepped all the way back really fast as you can back,
panting,
and I got it. And then
he's like, no, we're good.
It's all good.
We're good. Don't worry. God took care of us while you were gone. He's like, oh, come on. No, he probably sing Baruch Hashem. Hashem loves me.
What do you mean 8 days?
No, but it is a real lesson, which is another topic, but it's an important lesson on, emunah and ishtadlut. Bitachon really and ishtadlut.
Yeah.
You have to trust in Hashem, but you have to do your part.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you didn't go and get the oil from the Galilee, Hashem wouldn't have done the miracle.
Yeah.
Hashem doesn't do it. There's no free lunches.
Yeah.
Meaning even from God, right? If he does a miracle, he's not going to do a miracle.
The old chestnut of God helps those who help themselves.
That's right. That's exactly it. Now, it doesn't always... Now, when they sent the person to the Galilee, or the group, or the team, or whoever went to the Galilee, they did not say, okay, God, help us out here with a miracle. Maybe they davened for it, but it wasn't conditional. They didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
They just lit it, and they're like, look, I have trust in Hashem. Hashem will take care of us. It's very similar to like job searching. You know, job search, you don't know what's going to happen. I thought even before this job, I was going to go to Sydney. I had an interview in Sydney. I was like, I'm a lock for there. And Wellington's a nice place. I didn't know anything about Wellington. I mean, I'm happy I'm here. I'm happy I got here. It's probably a better place than Sydney.
And now you have a podcast. Look at that.
I have a podcast. So, no regrets. But at the time, I didn't know anything about the Southern Hemisphere. I'd never been to Australia or New Zealand. I still haven't been to Australia. So, surprisingly. So...
That's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. New Zealand's a nicer country. So, Wellington... and I just put myself out there for all these different jobs. There was 3, Edmonton or Sydney or here, and ended up being Wellington. The point being that, you put yourself out there, you do your due diligence. Wanted to be a community rabbi somewhere, and this is the one that fell. It's not like it's not necessarily the one I put in the most intent or most effort for. Yeah. And so that happens. What happens with business deals, like for marketing, you'll put out for a lot of different places. You really pitch hard to someone, and sometimes from someone else, it'll just come from somewhere else. But it only comes because you put in some kind of effort. Yeah. Even if it's not a direct result of your effort, it doesn't have to be causality. Yeah. It's much more a coinciding thing than it is causality. Yeah. So in this case, sending the people to the Galilee to do the ishtadlut, to do what they needed to do, what was in their control, then Hashem says, I'm going to help you out, now I'm going to do the miracle. Yeah. It's a very important lesson. Mm-hmm. It's not like they said, okay, Hashem will take care of us, have a miracle, and He'll magically give us olive oil. There is no such thing as a free lunch when it comes to miracles. That's an aside. Another answer is that the fact that they found the pure oil was a miracle in itself. And that was the first day. And then the extension of the miracle, it lasted. Of lasting 7 days. And then it burned down, but then it lasted for 8 days. Even though the day number 1, it burned like pretty much all the way down, and then it lasted by miracle for 7 days. For the 7 days. So the first day is finding it. Plus 7 days that it lit on a sheer miracle when it was completely above the realm of the laws of nature. Yeah. Now, why is that such an important answer? Because they found it. Like, what's the big deal in finding it? Why is it such a miracle? So now that you know the history, I've refreshed your memory. and you've done your own research as well. Then why would that be such a significant thing to find specifically a pure jug of oil, given everything we've said? Why is that significant?
Stick it to the man. Well, the Rashaim, the internal war that's happening within the...
Oh, so please elaborate. So how is that a symbolism?
Because you're going out of your way in order to find... You could use any of the jugs of oil. We've established that already. Mm-hmm. Because you can still light with impure oil, even though it's not as... mehadrin.
That's right.
But you go out of your way to find the perfect jug of oil in order to be able to light. That in itself is a miracle, for one. But it also means that you have gone out of your way to not Lakadesh, but like
sanctify.
To sanctify and like to serve God in that sense. Like you've gone above and beyond.
Meaning it's the culture war, right?
Yeah.
So in a culture war, you want to make a statement, and we talked about what's the statement. The statement is we are not going to compromise and just light any oil. Specifically, what did they want the Jews to do? They wanted the Jews to conform to Hellenism. Yeah. Why didn't the Greeks destroy... So you have to take all through the thought process, right? Why did the Greeks not destroy the oils? The Babylonians destroyed the temple. The Romans afterwards ended up
destroying
the temple, even though they had 150 or so odd years where the temple was under Jewish autonomy and they were fine with it. But then it got to a point where they destroyed it in the middle of the early Roman Empire. So nation and the Persians helped facilitate building it because it was in their self-interest that everyone is happy that they wouldn't rebel against the Persian Empire, which worked, by the way.
Yeah.
It was great. It was very smart.
Great. Yeah.
Except they didn't stand a chance against Alexander the Great. But as far as how to run an empire, the Persians really had it right. Make everybody happy. And then they won't rebel against you.
And they had a massive empire as well.
And they had a massive empire.
Yeah.
Massive.
Hodu at Kush.
Yeah. Almost like the size of the Ottoman Empire, which was also huge.
Huge, yeah.
And even think of the Ottoman Empire, like Suleiman, the great, the magnificent, the amazing,
Sultan Suleiman.
The Sultan Suleiman in Istanbul, right? He built unbelievable walls around Istanbul, but he built a relatively modest wall around Jerusalem, which was an unwalled city at that time, because the walls had been destroyed. The Crusaders and possibly the Rome before.
That brings up a different question to my mind about Purim, but
but the
different episode.
But he built the city. Why he built the wall, and that wall is still the wall to this very day.
Yeah,
it's on the Ayyubi wall, which was the later Islam wall.
Yeah,
right.
But
before it was destroyed by the Crusaders.
They have like archaeological digs or something of the old wall when.
Yeah, it's basically the same. The Ayyubi wall.
Thickness of it.
Yeah, that's a whole. We can do that another time because I did a tour with the lady whose name is Tamar Haetzni, who wrote the Wikipedia for the walls of the old city. Really fascinating. Really fascinating stuff. Cool. She's an amazing guide. She's a religious lady and a Jewish religious lady in Israel. Really good guide. Really, really good guide. Anyways. But the point is that why did he build the wall? So that the Jews would be happy.
Yeah.
And since the Jews were happy, they didn't rebel against the Ottoman Empire. They thought it was great. They ran Jerusalem to the ground. There was poverty and illness and all that stuff. But initially he built the wall and they were happy. Right. But the Greeks, they didn't do any of that. They didn't make the Jews happy.
Yeah.
But they also didn't destroy them.
They didn't do it. Yeah.
They wanted to destroy them culturally. Which is actually smarter.
Like getting them to assimilate.
Yeah, it was assimilation.
Yeah.
But that was their proclaimed goal. Like that was they were very open about their war. And they also had an army. But the point was Hellenism. Meaning if the Jews would convert to Hellenism, that's what they needed to do. But that means that we're going to desecrate everything you think is holy. So by lighting the desecrated olive oil, you were essentially giving in to the real war, which was the culture war.
The culture war.
And the spiritual war. So if you did that, it would be like shooting yourself in the foot. It would be spiritual suicide. So you can't do that. So they said, okay, we have to have our own oil that's pure. Why? Because if we light that, we're giving it to the Greeks. And then we might as well have lost the war.
Yeah.
Like it was that bad. It wasn't an exaggerate. It wasn't an extremism on their part.
Yeah.
It was like, we're only going to light pure oil. Why? Because we stick to our values. And they found one. And finding that one was amazing. Because the Greeks basically said, you need to conform. They're like, we'll never conform. And they found that one, and that in itself was a miracle. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are also other reasons that 8 symbolizes above and beyond nature. The fact that the army was able to defeat the big and also very powerful Greek army with amazing war tactics and war elephants and things like that at the time. I mean, there's a story I just heard about in a podcast by a Jewish religious historian, Abramson. Very, very good talk. He talked about how Elazar, who was one of the Chashmonaim, he actually killed the elephant, thinking that Antiochus is on that elephant by going underneath it and stabbing it.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
And whatever ended up happening is the elephant, lots of gravity, it crushed him, and he died. And Antiochus wasn't on that elephant, but It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Christians later drew a depiction of it, but they didn't know how an elephant looked in medieval Europe because they'd never seen one.
Yeah.
So they drew it like a cat or
yeah.
other different,
Like a giant
a dog or like a pointed
dog
Doberman.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an
Yeah,
interesting
I think I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's a famous painting.
Yeah.
It is.
So
meaning it's the culture war as much. There's more answers, of course.
Yeah.
You can look them up. You can look up the 100 answers to the question. The point isn't to go through all 100 answers. But
I think there's an article by Rav Yuri Cohen that goes through.
You can find it. You go through Wikipedia. We can even put the link possibly in the
description.
As well.
Let's finish off. What's your favorite Hanukkah food?
My favorite Hanukkah food is gluten-free latkes.
Yeah.
With applesauce. Some people like it with sour cream, which is also good. But if you put it with sour cream and schug, that's even better. Yemenite spice with like parsley, coriander, olive oil, salt, garlic, and chili peppers. A lot of chili peppers.
Yeah.
Like
red chilies.
6. That's good stuff.
Mine is Sufganiyot.
You do. You like,
but with ribat chalav, not
jam. Butterscotch.
Yeah, my favorite.
Oh, that's so good. See, I can't eat sufganiyot anymore because I'm gluten free. The gluten free sufganiyot.
It's not like you can break the rules for Hanukkah. Like
no,
just
I'll
one
get
day.
sick. Yeah. It's
worth it.
Eggnog.
Oh yeah. That's what I
was. And gluten-free beer. What's wildly popular in the States is actually latkes and vodka.
Really?
Yeah. We should do that here. Latkes and vodka.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It's good
Sounds
stuff.
good.
Yeah.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, because it sounds latkes and vodka sounded like, but it's like all the 20-year-old things. Latkes and vodka. And you have, oh my god, unbelievable.
Well, the chavot. The groups that go out and
latkes and vodka.
So because it was more of a history lesson, we had to give them something to argue about, which is why I brought up food.
That's right. So I like latkes. I almost like sufganiyot, which are not donuts, by the way.
No, but close to.
And by the way, just like Jerry Seinfeld says, are the donut holes actually made of donut holes?
That's a good
question.
And
if it is a donut hole, it's not a hole.
No, it's not.
It's the donut. You can't eat the hole.
I think that's enough.
On that note, thank you, Mr. Jerry Seinfeld, for giving us some
On
humor.
that note, follow us on Instagram at EOTS_podcast. Like, share with everyone. Subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us on all the audio platforms. I know that we're now on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, nice. All right, good job.
Even though we don't have like a link, but that's okay. You can look us up. It's the same yellow E, the orange E with the orange circle with the black E on it. So that's our logo, and that's going to be.
Please share, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Love when you guys listen. And
argue it with us in the comments.
Argue, please, argue. We don't have enough arguments.
No, we don't. But
we'll get there.
Latkes versus
Sufganiyot. Yeah, I mean, we can make a poll, right?
Yeah.
Latke, and if you want a latke and vodka party, let us know. We'll see if we can arrange one.
Well, that's been everything.
Hanukkah Sameach, and thank you,
Hanukkah Sameach. This has been everything under the sun. Enjoy your week.